What if events went differently in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2? Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, to another brand new episode of What If? What if Doc Ock had survived his encounter with Spider-Man and stopped the fusion reactor at the end of Raimi's Spider-Man 2? How could the small change ripple across the multiverse? Well, in today's Marvel's What If, I wanted to showcase a brand new timeline where Otto is alive during the ending of Spider-Man 2 and in Spider-Man 3. Seeing how I did a version like this before, it was one of my first ever videos for What If, I knew I had to come back to this after over 4 years. I wanted to remaster this due to the first version being deleted on the channel back in 2021 because of a hacker who tried to take down this channel. After some time, I had new motivation to remaster a version of this Spider-Man 2 Marvel's What If. I do want to say, if you enjoy these videos and would like to see more updates and content, become a Patreon member. It's starting at just $1 a month, and it goes a very long way to help me make more of these videos possible. But that being said, let's dive into the latest Marvel's What If. Doctor Octopus was at the cusp of his career. He was about to show the world a groundbreaking scientific discovery that would revolutionize energy. His sponsor, Harry Osborn, was so proud. His wife's support and encouragement was a great spur to activate his genius. He wished he didn't have to endure the pain of attaching the anchor arms to himself, but there was no other way to create, manage, and contain the fusion reactor. When all seemed to be going well, the entire discovery began to fall apart. The reactor's energy began to spike, and it turned into a flaming magnet. The subsequent magnet pull resulted in his wife dying because of flying glass. He remembered stopping Spider-Man from literally pulling the plug on the reactor. Then, he was electrocuted by the reactor. Now, Dr. Otto Octavius stood in the ruins of an abandoned building by the docks. That's when he discovered that the anchor arms were working without his direction. He heard voices in his head, and he quickly realized that the inhibitor chip he had created to guard against this scenario was fried. He knew that he was in trouble. He began wondering what could have gone wrong during the expedition. He quickly summarized that he must have gotten the calculations wrong. The voices in his head told him that his calculations were correct, and he needed to rebuild. Dr. Octavius welcomed this and decided to expand the reactor's containment field to make it better and stronger than ever before. He wondered where he would get the money to fund the project this time. Oscorp Industries or any other tech company would want nothing to do with him. An idea generated by the anchor arms. AI was to steal money. He accepted without a protest. Peter Parker was getting his ass handed to him by J. Jonah Jameson, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Bugle. The reason was that he had been present at Oscorp Industries when Dr. Octavius's expedition had gone haywire, and he had not taken any photos of the event. Peter was tempted to inform J. Jonah Jameson that the whole city could have been destroyed if he had not unplugged the reactor. He instead kept his mouth shut and took the scolding in stride. JJJ then asked him to attend the event of High Society, a celebration of his son, an astronaut. Peter was to attend the event and be the society's official photographer. Because of a sad financial situation, he asked Jameson for an advance payment, but the man laughed him off. Peter Parker and Aunt May were at the bank. She had defaulted on her mortgage payment because her income wasn't enough to pay for the house. They had managed to get by when Uncle Ben was supporting with his own income. Now she was all alone. Her application for a loan was denied because she didn't have enough savings. After the bank left, Peter touched her gloved hand and squeezed it, saying they'll figure it out one way or another. Suddenly, Peter's spider sense went off, but before he could make sense of it, loud noises and screams erupted from behind him. He looked over his shoulder to see a heavy-duty steel door of one of the bank's safes heading towards him and Aunt May. He used his right leg to push May's chair out of the way. The motion pushed his own chair out of the way too, in the nick of time. The door smashed into the table, breaking it into smithereens. Aunt May called out to Peter, but he was gone. Doc Ock was confronted by a rather brave security officer. Too bad the guy was brave in front of the wrong guy. From the corner of his eyes, Ock spied 3 other cops behind him, assigning each arm to each cop. He picked them up and flung them far away from him. With the meddlesome cops out of the way, he set about his business. He found a big sack in the safe and began stuffing it with small sacks filled with wads of dollar bills. As he closed the sack and made to leave, the nuisance showed up. From the camera in one of the arms, he saw Spider-Man. Doc Ock smiled and picked up a sack of coins and threw it at Parker, who dodged it. He threw several coin bags at Peter, who dodged them all. Peter caught one of them with his webs and lunged it directly at Dr. Otto Octavius. The sack hit him square in the face, and he momentarily was stunned. Ock then continued throwing sacks of coins at Parker. Peter dodged them and tried repeating his move of catching a sack and throwing it back at Doc. But his webs weren't coming out, and a sack caught him right in the face. The blow knocked him out. Doc Ock promptly closed the distance between them and picked him up with his arms. He squeezed Spider-Man, attempting to draw the life out of him. But Peter used his webs and drew tables to Doc Ock. Ock was flung out of the glass window of the bank into the road. The cops showed up and almost shot Ock, but he picked up Aunt May as a hostage, and that made the cops stand down. He began climbing the walls of an office building in an attempt to escape, but Spider-Man followed him. Spider-Man asked Doc to hand Aunt May over to him, but instead, he released her to fall onto the street. Spider-Man jumped to catch Aunt May, but he wouldn't reach her in time. He shot his webs and caught her. Then, he pulled her up quickly to himself, but then Doc Ock pushed him into the wall. He lost control of Aunt May, and when she was flung upwards, her umbrella was her saving grace, for its curved handle caught onto a statue. She held on, but her gloved hands were slipping on the synthetic fabric of the umbrella. Peter yelled at her to hold on. He was busy battling with Ock. He delivered punches to the face of Ock, while the arms were trying hard to restrain him. Doc Ock slammed Peter into a building, and they fought hard in there. He heard Aunt May screaming, and he freed himself from Doc Ock's grip. He got out of the building and made to crawl to get her, but an arm was restraining him. Aunt May screamed as her hand slipped off of the umbrella, and she went into a free fall. Peter tried to break free from Doc's grip, but it didn't work. The screams coming from below filled his mind, and surprisingly, he heard their sickening thud from Aunt May's fall. His body went limp, and Doc Ock released him and laughed loudly as he left the scene. Peter was downcast. He half listened to the priest as the casket that held Aunt May's body was lowered into the ground. It was a week after that Doc Ock had caused her to fall to her death. He had found a secluded place and changed into his normal clothes before going down the street to loosen his emotions. It hadn't been an easy time for Peter. He was incounselable. His best friend Harry Osborn hadn't left his side. To add to his miseries, the Daily Bugle was publishing smear articles on Spider-Man for not saving May Parker. The casket had been put into the ground, and the priest had stopped speaking. The crowd began to disappear, but Peter did not move. He did not have tears in his eyes. He thought about how unremorseful Octavius was. The despicable man even laughed when it happened. The anger Parker felt was so complete, and he let it consume him. He would make Doc Ock suffer the same fate. Then he felt a tap on his shoulder and whirled around. Standing behind him was Mary Jane. She told him that everyone had left. He looked around and found out that she was right. He started walking with her to leave the cemetery. At some point, she stopped and hugged Peter, saying that she could not imagine what he was going through. She asked how he was doing, and he said that he was fine. He asked her the same question, and she talked about how she was doing well in acting plays. She stopped when she noticed that Peter's gaze was fixated on her left hand. She said that she was engaged to marry Captain John Jameson. Peter thought to himself, oh great, my high school crush is getting married to the crappiest boss's son. Peter, however, smiled heartily and told MJ congratulations. He hugged her for good measures, and they continued walking again. Peter stood in J. Jonah Jameson's office and quietly listened to the man chastening him for not taking photos of the duel between Doc Ock and Spider-Man. He said that Spider-Man had failed to save that woman, and if there were photos, the paper would have been more credible. Technically, J. Jonah Jameson was right. Spider-Man hadn't saved Aunt May, but then he wasn't about to tell the man that he was Spider-Man. Instead, he told J. Jonah Jameson that woman was his aunt. J. Jonah Jameson went quiet for a moment, and then he said that he was sorry. Peter was angry and said that he didn't really give a shit. He then told J. Jonah Jameson that he was quitting. He told JJJ to get his Spider-Man shots from someone else. With that, he left the office. Harry Osborn sat in his living room drinking vodka. He was still wearing his black suit from the funeral. He was bitter at Spider-Man now more than ever. The crazy guy had let Aunt May die, and that made his best friend a crying mess. Then he heard thuds rocking the buildings. He wondered if it was the drink that was getting him tipsy and messing with his mind. He still stood and walked to the balcony. He looked down and something mechanical launched at him. It hit him in the chest and sent him sailing backwards. His glass of vodka had left his hand somewhere mid-flight. Octavius had showed up to his house, an anchor arm clutching his glass of vodka, raised it to Dr. Octavius's lips. He took a sip and flung the glass away. Harry asked him what he wanted, and he promptly replied that he wanted the tritium. He said that he needed more. Harry told him he was out of his mind, and he said that he would destroy the entire city. He then said that he would never give Octavius anything. He made to run away, but Octavius grabbed him by his ankles and dangled him on the side of a building. Octavius told Harry that he didn't have time for all that. Either Harry gives him the tritium, or he gets dropped to his death. Harry quickly agreed to give him the tritium on one condition. He said that Octavius had to deliver Spider-Man to him, alive. Dr. Octavius then agreed to the deal and asked how he could find Spider-Man. Harry said that he doesn't know, and that he should just do his thing, and maybe Spider-Man would show up. He then added that Octavius could just ask Peter Parker, because Parker took photos of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle. As Octavius was leaving, Harry had a rethink. He was a horrible person for setting Octavius on Peter when the guy was grieving. He quickly shouted after Otto, saying that he should not hurt Peter. He wasn't sure Octavius heard that though. Peter was sorting through the stuff in the home when he heard a loud racket. The wall was suddenly thrown in, and standing before him was a man he really loathed. The mad scientist had shown up to still talk to him after all he had done to Aunt May. Octavius told Peter to tell Spider-Man to meet him at the West Side Tower at 3 p.m. Peter began to speak, but Octavius cut him off, saying that he didn't want any excuses. Octavius then left the house, leaving Peter seething in anger. Peter would be ready to take on Octavius, only this time, things would be different. Dr. Otto Octavius stood on the tower and watched Peter swinging towards him. Everything was working just as it had planned. Peter kicked Octavius in the face. There was no talk, slamming him into the tower. The Arbs grabbed Spider-Man and repeatedly slammed him into the tower. Then, Doc threw Peter down the tower. On his way down, Peter hit the long hand of the clock, and it sent it flying along with him. Peter caught the heavy-duty steel hand with his web and launched it back up to the tower, directly at Octavius. The scientist escaped by a hair's breadth. Octavius then broke the long hand and threw the two pieces right at Spider-Man, who dodged them both. Ock then jumped off the tower and landed on Peter, and the two fell on top of a moving train and continued their fight there. The fierce fight got the passengers frightened. Peter wanted to kill Octavius, and he didn't fail to imminent his arrival of that. The fight got Peter slammed into the train, hit by another grazed on the rail tracks, and so on. Doc also got beat, as Peter's blows always got past the arms and found its mark on Otto's face. Then, Octavius did the worst thing possible. He increased the speed of the train, and pulled out its gearbox, making it impossible to stop it. He then picked up Peter and took him to the top of a building with the arms. He collapsed Peter's arms and legs together and made him watch how the train would be destroyed by the wrought iron barrier. Peter tried getting out of the grip, but he suddenly had a feeling of déjà vu. It was all happening all over again. He was helpless to stop Octavius. The train slammed right into the barrier and was destroyed. There was no way anyone could have survived that. He surrendered and let Octavius choke him unconscious. Harry Osborn was drinking again. He was waiting for Spider-Man to be brought to him. He didn't have to wait long, for Dr. Otto Octavius had brought him the man he so desperately wanted. Dr. Octopus placed a bound and unconscious Spider-Man on the long Otto-Man in the room. He asked for the tritium and Harry went to the wall. He pulled aside a large photo of his dad to reveal a safe embedded in the wall. He opened it and gazed at the tritium, which was roughly the size of a small beach ball. Octavius pushed him out of the way and picked up the tritium and quickly left Harry's house. With Octavius gone, Harry faced Spider-Man and felt the anger bubbled up. He picked up a dagger and approached him. He then placed his hands on Spider-Man's head to remove the mask, saying that he needed to look him in the eyes as he killed him. When he pulled off the mask, Harry was so shocked, he dropped the dagger. At that moment, Parker woke up and broke free from his bonds, and he looked at the ground and saw the dagger and asked Harry if he was about to kill him. Harry ignored the question and said that all this while Peter was Spider-Man. He then accused Peter of killing his father, Norman Osborn. Harry then lunged at Peter and Peter quickly tackled him to the ground and told him that he did not kill Norman. Harry was not quiet. Harry was quiet, and Peter said that Norman was not who Harry thought he was. Harry pushed Peter off of him and asked him what he meant by that. Peter got off of the floor and sat at the Ottoman. Harry joined him there. Peter then told him that Norman was the Green Goblin. Harry said that it could not have been possible, but Peter reiterated what he said. He said that Norman must have taken the Goblin serum that was at Oscorp that made him go crazy, and that's why he used the glider to take down his opponents. Harry then asked Peter if he killed him, but Peter said that he didn't. He told Harry how he dodged the glider and how it instead gone and impaled Norman. Harry recalled the autopsy named, and the cause of death to come from the stab wounds in his father's torso. Harry then told Peter that he was so sorry for being a terrible person. Harry also apologized for Dr. Octavius. When Harry mentioned Doc, Peter immediately got up and asked what Doc had gotten in exchange for him. Harry hung his head and said that he gave Dr. Octavius more tritium. Peter placed his palm on his forehead and asked Harry if he knew where Octavius would be. The man had to be stopped. After everything, Ock had killed all those people in the train, and his Aunt May. Harry then told him that Octavius had set up shop in an abandoned building by the docks. Peter put on his mask and told Harry that he was going to the docks to try and stop Octavius once and for all. He asked Harry to call for help. J. Jonah Jameson was in his office poring over some editorial work when his assistant walked in. Someone was on the line for Jameson. He grabbed the phone, listened for a moment, and slammed it down. He got up and put on his jacket. He announced that a source in the police department had called to inform him that Doctor Octopus was on the loose again, and that Spider-Man was on the way to stop him. JJJ then yelled at his assistant to get Peter Parker to meet him by the docks. She quickly reminded him that Peter Parker had quit, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He looked around his office and found a camera hanging on the wall. His assistant told him that he could just send someone else to cover the story, but he said that he wanted to do it by himself. At the docks, Dr. Otto Octavius was firing up his fusion reactor. He placed the tritium in the middle and smiled to himself, sang "The power of the sun in the palm of my hand." He typed a few more commands, and the reactor activated the tritium into a large golden sun. Peter swung and kicked Otto away from the reactor, Parker yelling with a vengeance at Otto, saying that he would not let him destroy the city. Otto said that Peter should try and stop him. Peter went to the cables, but the anchor arms flickered him out of the way. Peter then tried drawing Otto away from the reactor, but the scientist wasn't taking the bait. The reactor started magneting metals to it. It jattered, started becoming unstable, and it was breaching its containment field. Otto was resolved in not letting Peter get to the fusion reactor. Peter decided to kick Otto right into the sun and vaporize him. As he swung directly at Otto, two arms caught him by the legs and slammed him into the wooden floor. Otto then held him up and laughed at him for his pathetic heroics. Otto used one of his arms and extended a sharp steel spike to stab Peter. Peter then webbed up one of the heavy-duty cables that powered the reactor and picked it up to block the stab that was coming his way. Otto instead stabbed the cable, and the electric current conducted through the actinator and electrocuted his entire body. While Ock was being electrocuted, Peter jumped out of the way to the power source and used most of his strength in disconnecting the heavy-duty cables from the power grid. He fell down, exhausted, just as Harry Osborn ran into the room. Harry went to Peter and asked him if he was okay. Peter mumbled in the affirmative. Harry then said that he had called the cops and that they were outside, together with soldiers of the National Guard. Peter noticed that the room was still glowing, and he looked up and saw that the reactor was still functional. He looked around for what could be powering it, and he saw the only fried cables, which he had disconnected. He ran to Doctor Octopus, who had fallen in the water after being electrocuted. The water made the arms stop working. Peter punched Octopus, saying he killed his Aunt May, and now he was going to kill everyone in the city. In rage, he said that he could just kill Octopus right now. Harry Osborn came to Peter's side and told him that he understood that Peter was angry and wanted to take revenge for what had happened to Aunt May. He said that people are always good, despite the bad that they had. He said that Dr. Octopus could be redeemed because it was the AI of the arms that had controlled his actions. And J. Jonah Jameson showed up and began clicking his camera. Harry yelled at him to get out, and JJJ said that there was no way he was going to pass up the opportunity of taking deserving photos. Harry chose to ignore him. Then, from outside, they heard the police asking Dr. Otto Octavius to surrender and exit the building. They then said that they would count to 3 and that the National Guard will unleash bullets on the building. Peter and Harry together began dragging Octavius out of the building, but J. Jonah Jameson stayed where he was, happily taking photos. Harry yelled at Jameson to follow them, but the man ignored them. On 3, when Harry, Peter, and Octavius had barely exited the building, it was riddled with bullets. Peter shouted a loud no, but it was too late. The damage had been done. When the army saw that Ock was out, they stopped firing. Peter ran and saw that J. Jonah Jameson was dead. He felt sorry for the man, picked him up, and took him outside. Meanwhile, the reactor was pulling the armored trucks of the National Guard. All their guns were being pulled towards the reactor. Peter turned to Harry and said, "Well, now that the scientist is unconscious, any ideas on how to stop this reactor?" Harry said nothing and looked at Otto. He recalled how the arms had been useless when it was immersed in water. He then looked up with a bright look and said that the reactor had to be dropped into the river. Peter then ran to the commanding officers on the ground and asked for C4 explosions. He was given them, and he went inside the building and placed the charges under the steel supports of the reactor. He got out of the building and asked the commander to blow up the charges. He promptly did, and there was a loud explosion. The steel supporters had broken and the reactor fell into the river. The threat had been destroyed. An unconscious Otto Octavius laid on an operating table in a secure military facility. The doctors began swaying the arms, and not long after, all 4 arms were separated from him and taken to a classified location. The doctors began the surgical process to remove the steel pins that were embedded in his vertebrae. It was a gradual process, but they did the job. A month later, a well and AI-free Dr. Otto Octavius sat in a room and got briefed on his actions that led him there to a military detention facility. The DoD staff then told him that he would either go to jail for life or become a scientist for the US military. He had to pick. Long after, the city was back to normal, but Peter had to undergo treatment. He was a mess after what had happened after Otto Octavius was defeated, and he knew that he had to seek help. So he started seeking help and he started getting better. He started going to more classes and was thinking of giving up Spider-Man until Peter would see something in the sky. An explosion would happen, and Peter would walk towards it. He would see black goo coming out of a rock, and Peter went to discover it. And that is going to be it for What If Dr. Otto Octavius Had Lived in Spider-Man 2? It's a very sad and really depressing ending where Otto had ended up killing everybody on the train. It was very sad. You know, we did a what if like this a long time ago with what if Spider-Man couldn't stop the train, and I also did a what if where what if Aunt May was killed in Spider-Man 2, but that was actually in a different what if. It was in what if Ock had the symbiote in Spider-Man 2, so I took a little bit from there, but also this is an original story, so it's a lot different from the original one that was deleted all those years ago, and it leaves room for a part 2 where Otto Octavius could be working for the military at a detention center. And I think if we go down this line, I definitely would like to consider maybe Ock trying to get his arms back and really complete what he started, and maybe kind of doing a Spider-Man 2000 storyline where maybe Ock and the Carnage symbiote work together. I mean, that's a fantasy for another video, but it would be really interesting to see nonetheless. So that being said, what did you think of What If Doc Ock Had Lived in Spider-Man 2? What if Doc Ock didn't end up being killed in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2? How did you enjoy this Marvel's What If? And if you did, do make sure to consider subscribing to the channel and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But anyways, as always, you can check me out on Instagram as well as Twitter. I do post a lot on Instagram. You can see a ton of updates when new releases are happening. It's a great way to keep up with the latest projects on this channel, as I will be going with a lot more. There's going to be a lot more animated stuff coming out. But that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.